My name is Frank Hiley, and I am presenting the Model Constructor Schema as a potential solution to the hard problem of consciousness. Please excuse me for reading this talk. My 75-year-old brain is much more dependable as a reader than it would have been at trying to remember exactly what I wanted to say for each slide. On my website, www.frankhile.com, you can obtain a copy of the PDF of our 84-page paper representing this full model. Plus, you can get these PowerPoint slides, the Word document containing all the words I am saying, and eventually the full video of this talk. Unfortunately, in this 20-minute talk, I can only present a small fraction of the content of that 84-page paper. This consciousness model is an agent-based information processing functional model of the human brain. The two main agents are the modeler and the controller, and the modeler is then decomposed into the model constructor and the target regulator agents. According to the good regulator theorem, the free energy principle, and other research, to optimally control a system, a model of that system is required. Therefore, to optimally control the world, we need a model of the world, and to optimally control an agent, we need a model of the agent. Let us start with the world model, which consists of a concrete world model built from sensory inputs, plus an abstract world model containing a range of concepts from concrete concepts to purely abstract concepts. Finally, the world model will also contain the memories of past concrete world model objects. Now we will define some terminology. This model claims that focal attention produces focal experiences. We will use the term targets, which are always focal attention targets. These targets can either be concrete, abstract, or concrete memory objects. We define a sensory stream as the continuous flow of sensory data for a single concrete target or for the entire concrete world model. An abstract stream is a discrete, finite, ordered sequence of abstract targets, such as the words in this sentence. We will discuss diffuse attention and diffuse awareness after we first describe the modeler and the controller agents. We will also describe the inputs, outputs, and the main connections between these agents. The sensory stream inputs are on the left, and the motor outputs are on the right. Their abstract inputs are on the left, and the outputs are on the right. Of course, the abstract stream inputs and outputs must be implemented using the sensory inputs and motor outputs as shown by these red arrows. The abstract stream of the controller's inner voice updates the abstract world model. The controller's emotions and inner visualizations are treated as a sensory stream that updates the concrete world model. Finally, the focal attention data bus supplies the target's focal model information to the controller so it can achieve its goals. That bus in the other direction will allow the controller to request new top-down focal attention targets. Now we will discuss diffuse awareness in the academic literature. In 1890, William James wrote, "Millions of items of the outward order are present to my senses, which never properly enter into my experience. Why? Because they have no interest for me. My experience is what I agree to attend to." We claim this describes diffuse awareness. Then, 90 years later, Treisman and Jalad wrote this as the opening sentence of their paper. "When we open our eyes on a familiar scene, we form an immediate impression of recognizable objects, organized coherently in a spatial framework." Thus, this is another description of diffuse awareness. In their paper, they used the term pre-attentive processing for the neural process that produces this diffuse awareness. Now I will ask the audience to perform this experiment to experience diffuse awareness. This experiment will take less than a minute. First, direct your central vision to the big X on the screen and keep your central vision on that X throughout this experiment. Now, without moving your eyes, take in the experience of that entire forward visual hemisphere out to the edges of vision. Just holistically take in that entire hemisphere. That is the diffuse awareness. For the second part of your experiment, continue to keep your central vision on the X, but now, without moving your eyes, try to pick out some object in the periphery and internally note its color or shape. Note how different that picking and noting effort was compared to the initial effortless taking in of the entire diffuse awareness. That ends the experiment. Notice that to pick or comment about objects in the periphery, you needed to use peripheral visual focal attention, and I hope you noticed how different that felt compared to the initial effortless diffuse awareness. This experiment shows that diffuse awareness is only experienced by your modeler, since your controller needed to use focal attention to do that picking and noting. The controller can comment on focal experiences. However, the paper argues that only the modeler has both focal experiences and diffuse awareness. Now we're going to describe the agents and their self-models. Here's the decomposition of the human and the modeler. An agent self-model will have a suffix of self. There are two distinct kinds of self-models. First is the control self-model. Then there are the two symbolic self-models that represent our agents in the world model. These are the body icon in the concrete world model and the IMI icon in the abstract world model. So now we can list all the agent self-models. The human self is the modeler plus the controller. The modeler self-model has two parts. The MCschema, which is the control self-model for the model constructor, and the TR schema, which is the control self-model of the target regulator. Here's the controller, and here's the human with the three controller self-models and the two modeler self-models. Finally, here's the human schema control self-model. This equation indicates that the MCschema, TR schema, and controller schema must communicate with each other to implement the equivalent of the unified human schema control self-model. We have now defined all the components of the complete world model, so here's a diagram representing the modeler and the complete world model. The modeler is composed of the model constructor and the target regulator. The model constructor updates the world model and the focal attention models, which consist of the focal model and the target profile. There's one pair of these models for each target. Then we have the schema self-models, such as the MCschema, the TR schema, and the controller schema. The only remaining self-models are the body icon and IMI icon, which are contained in the world model. Now we will discuss the functionality of the model constructor. The model constructor has three major functions: to understand, assess, and update. These functions allow the model constructor to convert incoming sensory and abstract streams into the concrete and abstract world models and to generate bottom-up targets. Now we look at the model constructor understanding functionality. The model constructor understands the changes in the incoming sensory data, understands how to combine multiple sensory streams to create and update one unified concrete world model, understands how to use the abstract stream to change the abstract world model, and understands how to convert text images and audio speech into new incoming abstract streams. Moving on to the assessing functionality, the model constructor assesses how the world model changes might affect an agent's goals. If the change makes a goal more or less likely, then that world model part could become a bottom-up target. The potential bottom-up target is then passed on to the target regulator. Now we look at the updating functionality. The model constructor updates all the appropriate models. This always includes the world model and may also include the focal attention models for targets. It also maintains the short-term sensory memory and manages general, medium-term, and long-term memory. Now we combine these understands, assesses, and updates functions, and do an overall description of the model constructor. The model constructor understands and assesses incoming data and updates the appropriate models. The appropriate models always include the world model and may also include the focal attention model for targets. The model constructor may also produce a bottom-up abstract stream when understanding text or speech. The assessments may suggest potential bottom-up targets. When we are conscious, notice that all the text in the red box happens all the time, whereas all the rest of the description may or may not happen at any given time. Therefore, we will now turn the text in the red box into a hypothesis about how the model constructor produces experiences. Our hypothesis is that experiences are produced when the model constructor understands and assesses incoming data and updates the world model. Therefore, most experiences would include a suggestion or a feeling of being understood, or not understood if the model constructor is not successful. The understood experience is ubiquitous, which makes it hard to notice. So the not understood experience is usually much more noticeable. An exception would be a peak aha experience. For example, when you have been working on a hard problem for a while and suddenly realize the solution, that might be a peak aha experience where that newly understood experience is very noticeable. To demonstrate those experiences yourself, here are 3 different sentences for you to read and understand or not understand. I assume that everyone understood that sentence and that you already had that fact in your abstract world model, so you did not have to update the world model. All the individual words in this sentence were understood, but the sentence overall meaning was certainly not understood. Note that this is a scrambled version of sentence 1. I assume that everyone understood the words and the whole sentence, but I bet that some of you rejected the sentence as not true, since this sentence contradicts the truth of sentence 1. Let us see if this image allows some of you to accept both sentence 1 and sentence 3 now. Basically, mathematicians have found 2 categories of uniform curved 3-dimensional spaces where the sum of the angles in a triangle can either be less than or greater than 180 degrees. So did that image allow you to suddenly understand that both sentence 1 and sentence 3 can be true? Now let us consider concrete experiences. We speculate that babies and young children may have many not understood experiences. However, by the time we are adults, our model constructor has gotten very good at understanding the concrete world model, such that almost everything is understood. Note that there are exceptions. Consider the impossible trident. Like the scrambled sentence, each end of this image can be understood, but the overall image cannot be understood. Also see the many other examples of impossible images drawn by MCschema. In addition, abstract art is often initially not understood, which challenges us to decipher the ambiguous or seemingly contradictory elements. Finally, magicians' magic tricks often cannot be understood. Now we will propose a hypothesis about the source of the qualia of any concrete world model experience. We propose that the model constructor directly provides the understood or not understood experiences, and it also provides the sensory data values stored in the concrete world model. Whereas the MCschema provides the model of the understood or not understood experiences, and an additional qualia model of the concrete world model sensory data, which is the model of the qualia of the experience. To get concrete, let's consider colors. Human vision is complicated since there are rod cells and 3 kinds of cone cells with significant overlapping wavelength sensitivities. Therefore, we are going to use a simplified color vision model. We will adopt the much simpler RGB system used in cameras and computer displays. The 3 different RGB integers can independently range from 0 to 100, producing roughly 1 million colors, which is about the number of colors humans can distinguish. So we will assume that the data stored for color vision has three integers between 0 and 100 that represent those possible RGB values. Now, the quality model function mentioned in the previous slide is an implementation of David Chalmers' double aspect proposal, so we explore that proposal here. Chalmers proposes that information, or at least some information, has two basic aspects, a physical aspect and a phenomenal aspect. The physical aspect could be, for example, the RGB values stored in the concrete world model. The experiential or phenomenal aspect would be the color values that the quality model function output. How would the MCschema access these RGB values? We assume that both the constructor and the MCschema has a reference to all these data locations. Thus, the MCschema can fetch all the RGB values it requires and can compute the experiential color value. We will now propose an explanation of how all the concrete world model qualia experiences are produced. We start with reality, where the human identifies with the controller. The human thinks they are the body and produce all the body's actions and speech, which is precisely what the controller does. The human says they have experiences, and our model proposes that the model constructor is the source of all experiences. The controller can report the names of the qualia that it thinks it experiences. However, we claim that the controller does not have understood or qualia experiences. What the controller does do is to obtain the RGB values from the focal model, and it then says red for RGB data values of 100, 0, 0, even though it has no actual experience. Now, in the model of reality row, the model of the human must be one of the 5 human self-models we mentioned earlier. In fact, it must be the self-model associated with the model constructor, so it must be the MCschema. The activity would be the model of experience, which would also be the MCschema. Note that this MCschema would also contain a model of the understood or not understood experiences. Finally, the what column would be the model of the concrete world model RGB data, which would be the quality model function we have been discussing. Note that this quality model function is part of the MCschema. In fact, everything in this last row is part of the same MCschema. This is an important, or more accurately, this is an essential requirement. If there were 3 different objects, how could the self-model have the understood experience in another model or the quality experience in a third model? For example, consider attention schema theory by Graziano. In attention schema theory, there are 3 different objects in that last row. So there is no way that this could be a model of experience, since all 3 of these objects are unrelated. In fact, Graziano does not claim that his model explains experience. He only claims that his model explains why the human would have an illusion of having experiences. That is how our model differs from attention schema theory. We can and do propose an actual experience model. Now we'll return to our model. Since the model of reality row consists of only the MCschema object, and since the MCschema is a self-model of the human, that means the MCschema and the human can legitimately claim to have all those different kinds of experiences. On the other hand, the controller cannot have any experience. Note that this model of reality row does not differentiate between focal experiences or diffuse awareness. Thus, this model can explain all possible experiences. Said another way, focal experiences are simply diffuse awareness that can be described by the controller, but the controller is really only describing the RGB concrete world model values, not the actual experience. Now we address one of Chalmers' questions. Why does the brain create experiences at all? This model makes it seem like the experiences are a kind of side effect of the MCschema. After all, the experiences do not affect the behavior of the controller, who is perfectly happy saying that objects with RGB values of 100, 0, 0 are red, without actually experiencing the red quale. So why does the brain need the MCschema? The answer is that the MCschema is needed to optimize and control the model constructor. The answer I gave in the paper takes more than 4 pages, and most of those 4 pages discuss just these 3 topics. Also, many additional perceptual skills must be learned for vision as well as for all other sensory modalities. We claim that all of these optimizations are achieved because the MCschema trains the model constructor to construct the concrete world model optimally. Therefore, it turns out that experiences are a necessary side effect of the MCschema. The MCschema is needed to do all these optimization operations, and for example, the quality model function is needed by many or all of those optimization checks. For example, does the overall diffuse awareness concrete world model experience look the same no matter where our eyes are pointing? This is non-trivial to check since, for example, the density of photoreceptors decreases dramatically from the center of vision to the periphery. Now here are some topics that are fully explained in the paper. Thus, the paper will explain the differences between conscious versus unconscious thinking and the origin of intuition. In addition, the paper will provide answers to all of Chalmers' many why, how, and in the dark questions. We also propose some exceptions to our overall model in the form of additional small visual modeler to explain blind sight. In addition, we propose that expert concert pianists might have developed and trained a small hearing visual touch modeler that makes their playing much more automatic, requiring less conscious control from the primary modeler. We also explain how seemingly conscious decisions are made unconsciously by the controller, with the modeler just listening in and experiencing the exchange of top-down and bottom-up abstract targets. Finally, we compare our model to a few other consciousness models. In conclusion, this paper proposes the MCschema model of consciousness. We hope our model can respond successfully to the inevitable criticisms, and we are open to revising our model as needed. Now I am open to questions from the audience, and I hope I have the answers. At this point, I stopped the presentation and asked the audience if they had any questions. There were several questions and answers, but unfortunately were not recorded. Then one person did ask about the small modeler and blind sight, and I had a slide prepared to answer that question as follows. Thanks for asking about the small modelers and blind sight. We consider the question, is there motor activity that does not use the concrete world model? The answer to that question is yes. Spinal reflexes do not use the concrete world model. In fact, spinal reflexes can occur in unconscious patients. That leads to this question. Are there cortical reflexes? These would occur if there were semi-direct connections in the brain between sensory inputs and motor outputs that do not use the concrete world model. The term that we will use for these cortical reflexes are small modelers. For example, we claim that there is a small visual modeler that would assess hands reaching for, pointing at, or manipulating an object. The small visual modeler, for instance, might not generate a visual image per se. Instead, it could produce an error signal, directional guidance, and a distance measurements required for hand movement to point at, reach for, or manipulate an object. Therefore, if the primary modeler was blind in a specific visual field, the small visual modeler could still guide the hand successfully. Thus, this small visual modeler explains blind sight, where someone is blind in a visual area but can still point to objects in that area. Hence, blind sight is strong evidence for the existence of this small visual modeler. Whether or not this small visual modeler has consciousness is unclear. This small, simple modeler may not need a sophisticated MCschema, so it may be totally unconscious, just like spinal reflexes are unconscious. I then explore the possibility of pseudo-humans with 3 modelers for the 3 major senses. I argue that it's conceivable that these pseudo-humans may have 3 different independent consciousnesses, since they would have 3 independent, sophisticated MCschemas. This leads to the question, if there is one small visual modeler, could there be others? I argue that anytime years of practice allow some motor skill to improve dramatically, that could be evidence for the development of a new small modeler. For example, consider that a concert pianist could develop a small hearing visual touch modeler. This will allow the pianist to play much more automatically than a beginning piano student using only their primary modeler to learn to play. Could this small modeler be conscious? I think so. It probably has a very sophisticated small model constructor, so it would need a sophisticated and significant small MCschema to train the small model constructor to play fluently. Thus, this sophisticated small MCschema could have some separate kind of consciousness. At the same time, during the concert, the primary modeler consciousness could play the role of critic and conductor, perhaps speeding up or slowing down the small piano-playing modeler. At the end of the question period, someone objected that this model cannot solve the hard problem of consciousness. The answer to this objection is in the paper but was not in the presentation, and the answer involves the complete world model. So for completeness, I am paraphrasing and presenting the answer in the 84-page paper. This model does not solve the hard problem in the physical world. The only place where the hard problem can be solved is in the complete world model, and I claim that the MCschema represents experience, but only in this complete world model. After all, the data that the quality model function uses comes from the concrete world model, which is in the complete world model. That quality model function itself is contained in the MCschema, which is also in the complete world model. The human with the experience is represented by these 5 objects, which are also in the complete world model. Thus, the MCschema represents the human, the model of the understood, not understood experience of the object, and the quality model function of the experience object. That is the experience of the object, but it only exists and can only be experienced in the complete world model. That ends the presentation. We look forward to your feedback on our email address, and please visit our website for more information about this model. Thanks again for both your concrete, visual, and abstract conceptual focal attention.